Hi there, I'm Nafisa Latic, and this is Across the Balkans. The US-brokered peace agreement that ended the Bosnian War is being threatened like never before. But a US envoy to the Balkans says all members of Bosnia's presidency have assured him there will be no return to war. American diplomat Gabriel Escobar was in Sarajevo to meet members of the presidency on Monday. His visit came as the stability of Bosnia and Herzegovina has faced challenges from one of the country's three leaders, Bosnian Serb Milorad Dodik. He is threatened to break away the Serb entity, Republika Srpska, and introduced legislation that would create its own army and judiciary. Escobar says the international community does not support Dodik's separatist agenda and that the US will not allow any escalation.
Is that we all agreed that there will be no war. And that's the most important message. And that is not just a message that you're going to hear from all of the leaders that I meet with today, but you're going to hear that from regional leaders as well.
But those assurances are not enough to actually resolve the dispute. So what can be done to end the crisis? Our guest today argues that NATO should be redeploying troops to Bosnia. He's an associate professor of political science at the University of Sarajevo, Hamza Karčić. Hamza, could this be a solution? More NATO troops present in Bosnia?
Definitely. Because currently we have the European Union force in Bosnia, which numbers some 600 troops on the ground. And these are completely inadequate in dealing with any security crisis. So the only meaningful guarantee that we can have would be a redeployment of NATO troops to Bosnia, much like we had back in 95 and 96. So it's only with NATO that we have a degree of security that's currently much needed in this country.
Right, and how would the NATO deployment be carried out, in your opinion?
I think the most viable option would be for NATO to replicate its deployment from 95 and 96, meaning that NATO would have to be stationed this time also in the capital city of Sarajevo. It could use the Tuzla airport in the north. And this time, because of the current stage of the Bosnian crisis, it would need to be also deployed to the strategic town of Brčko in northeast. So NATO need not deploy or need not develop new deployment plans. It could just replicate the mission from 95 to 96. And so this would be the opportunity for the Biden administration to step in at this stage and try to safeguard all that has been achieved in Bosnia since 1995.
Right. Hamza, we are witnessing an increased diplomatic activity to the top US envoy to the Balkans visiting Sarajevo, meeting all three sides. And now we are seeing meetings with the Turkish president as well, with all sides. What can the US and Turkey do to help de-escalate? I mean, they are both on the same side, supporting Bosnia's sovereignty above all.
Yes, I think both the US and Turkey are the country that Bosnia can rely upon, and both of them have been very supportive of Bosnia's territorial integrity and sovereignty. So, first of all, what they could do is to lead NATO into deploying NATO presence in Bosnia, because Bosnians cannot count on the European Union force in Bosnia. And secondly, what they can do is to send high-level diplomatic representatives to the region to convey to Mr. Dodik that his secession will not be tolerated. Now, the American diplomat that was dispatched to Bosnia, Mr. Escobar, he is the fifth highest-ranking State Department official, which is not the most senior official that could have been dispatched. So dispatching the Deputy Secretary of State or even a visit by the Secretary of State himself, Antony Blinken, would make sense. On the Turkish side, Turkey is the second most powerful country in NATO, the second most powerful military. So Turkey and the US could actually move towards leading NATO into deploying troops, but also they could push for Bosnia's NATO accession, because if Bosnia remains in the limbo without this anchor within EU and NATO, all that has been achieved in the post-war period can slip away. So the best way not to lose Bosnia would be actually to anchor it firmly within NATO, and this is something that both the US and Turkey can push for.
Okay, and Hamza, just briefly, how do you see the situation playing out in Bosnia? I don't have much time, but just if we can go briefly through this last answer.
Well, this is the most substantial political crisis that we are currently facing, and Milorad Dodik is not bluffing this time, or he is not bluffing as much as he did previously. So he's taking very substantial steps towards secession, and the outcome is still uncertain, but there is still time to pressure him to stop whatever he has intended to do.
Hamza Karcic, thank you so much for joining us here on Across the Balkans. Let's turn our focus to another crisis engulfing Southeast Europe, COVID-19. In Slovenia, hundreds of people are demonstrating weekly against the government and its pandemic restrictions. A recent rally turned violent, and dozens were arrested in clashes with police who are accused of being heavy-handed. Mirna Brekalo joined the protests and spoke to Slovenia's interior minister, who many blame for the situation.
Friday night in Ljubljana, for this group of activists, it's not only for socializing. It's for expressing their views in a creative and provocative way. Protests have characterized the life of Sanja and Brane, who met 10 years ago, doing the same thing as they are now, protesting against the government of Slovenia's conservative Prime Minister Janez Janša.
This protest we started exactly 18 weeks ago, so about a year and a half. So ever since this government came to the power. This is my partner. Yeah, we met during the Slovenian how is it called uprisings in 2012, and ever since we are together in this activism. And we are involved in many protests involving injustices, political and social.
Basically, Janez Janša stole the situation in Slovenia, and he's abusing the power that he has. He has been abusing the COVID-19 crisis, and he is destroying the main principles of democracy and the rule of law. Every week we hear about new corrupted businesses that are never being solved. He's attacking media, he's attacking everybody who thinks critically toward what the government is doing.
Hundreds of Slovenians are gathering in a series of large and mostly peaceful protests, calling on the government of the populist Prime Minister to step down and call an early election. The weekly demonstrations in Ljubljana began shortly after Janša took office for a third term in early 2020 and coincided with the start of the COVID-19 epidemic in Slovenia.
Because although we have this one main demand, every week we point out a new subject that is going to rebuild the Slovenian society. So it's not always the same. We are not, just standing here and shouting. We are actually developing the alternative. So I would say that this actually motivates people to come here every day, although of course it's exhausting. And at the beginning, nobody thought that we will have to do it 80 weeks. We assume that if the majority in Slovenia wants to have early elections, of course the government will hear us and they're going to step down. But Janez Janša doesn't hear citizens, he just do what he wants.
2 days earlier, on Wednesday, in the same square, the same demand. Another group of protesters who began gathering from early September is marching through the city center, critical of the government and its response to the COVID crisis. The protests occur under tight police control, and protesters from both groups accuse the police of repression and excessive force.
Što želite od slovenske vlade?
Pa od njih ništa ne želim, samo da nas puste na miru, da radimo svoj posao i ništa drugo. Mi nismo besposlenici kao što nas hoće predstaviti, mi smo svesni građani.
COVID-19 brought people out on the street, so I've come to speak to the Interior Minister Aleš Hojs on how the government is managing this crisis, which is far more than just an epidemiological one. For 80 weeks we have now protests in Slovenia, which are ongoing. How do you explain this?
Protesti so se pravzaprav začeli, predno se je ta vlada sestavila. Gre v bistvu za protestnike, ki so izrazito politično fokusirani, torej protesti, ki so začeli v lanskem letu in tako kot ste vi povedala, so se začeli v petkih, so bili začeti z enim in edinim namenom, torej da se ta vlada ne sestavi, da ta vlada čim prej odstopi. Torej gre za izrazito orientirane ljudi, ki so bodisi sinovi in hčere visokih tožilcev ali pa visokih policijskih uradnikov, torej vseh tistih, ki so v prejšnjem sistemu v bistvu bili na nek način privilegirani. Kasneje pa so se te protesti nekako transformirali, to bolj v zadnjih nekaj mesecih, v to, da so se tem protestom, torej ne več v petkih, ampak v drugih dnevih priključili tisti, ki so začeli promovirati to, da je v bistvu virus, kako ne rečem, zabloda, da virus sploh ne obstaja, da je cepljenje neka želja oblasti po kontroli.
Like much of Central and Eastern Europe, Slovenia in recent weeks has seen a sharp rise in new coronavirus infections. The country of 2 million people has fully vaccinated 52% of its population, a smaller share than in many other EU nations. The government is now asking people to prove they've met what's known as the RVT condition, that they're either recovered, vaccinated or tested. Just like in some other European countries, to sit in a cafe like this one in Ljubljana, you need to have a vaccination certificate.
Imate PCT?
Imam.
Evo, lahko se usedete.
Hvala. A proof of recovery from COVID-19 is also an alternative, but if you choose to get a test, it is only valid for 48 hours. Which means that testing rather than vaccinating to access literally all public spaces in Slovenia could cost you more than €100 per month. Miha Orešnik is a journalist who covers Slovenian politics and government decisions during the pandemic. He also reported from the Wednesday protests where journalists often need to hire security to protect them from violence.
Ja mislim da je PCT uslov nešto najlogičnije, neka najlogičnija mjera koju je uvela vlada, ali je najlošije primljena. Zašto je to tako? To mora prvo da se zapita vlada sama, kako je te mjere komunicirala. U Sloveniji je to išlo na dopisnu sjednicu vlade preko vikenda. U subotu navečer dobili smo mail, mediji, da je to vlada usvojila, taj uslov PCT, i mi smo do ponedjeljka bili bez dodatnih objašnjenja, ali nisu ga dovoljno obrazložili. I nemaju ljudi više povjerenja u vladin način komuniciranja. To je najveći problem. I kad mi na to upozorimo, dobijemo odgovor od predsjednika vlade ili od ministra unutrašnjih poslova Aleša Hojsa na Twitteru. Vi mediji promovirate prosvjede, vi ste odgovorni za zaraze, za smrti i tako dalje.
What are the protesters asking from you as the interior minister? Are you ready to, let's say, reply or consider any of their demands?
Oni želijo bolj to, da se PCT ne implementira, torej da naj se več to ne pregleduje. To je bolj kot ne zdravstvena stroka, ne toliko stroka notranjega ministra. Je pa res, da je v tem primeru pač notranji minister izpostavljen zaradi tega, ker je kot nekak tisti, ki usmerja policijo, dejansko nad tem represivnim delom državnega sistema in pač mora neke usmeritve dati prav zato, da se zaščiti premoženje naših državljanov, tudi da se zaščitijo življenja, da se ne dogaja to, kar se je nekaj v preteklih tednih dogajalo, torej da so te protestniki nasilno zasedali ceste, onemogočali ljudem dostope do delovnih mest, do šol, do vrtcev in tako naprej.
Slovenia is split, divided. but I would say that it's not the only country that is in such position in the Europe. The point is that the Slovenian government has really failed in managing and mitigating the COVID-19 crisis. And all sorts of discomfort, discontent, and criticism arise from this, most of this. And if this issue is also combined and with the so-called, as I told before, illiberal government policies, then this can explain the situation in Slovenia. The point is what to do and how to change this government, and obviously the only way to do this are the elections.
Slovenia currently holds the EU's rotating presidency, and the next parliamentary elections are scheduled for next year. The current government seems to have no intention of calling on early vote, so protesters are gearing up for another massive protest.
12. novembra bodo ljudje iz cele Slovenije, vse nevladne organizacije, celotna civilna družba združena na Trgu Republike in pa na ljubljanskih ulicah, da skupaj pokažemo, kakšno prihodnost si želimo in da predamo vsem strankam naše zahteve.
Mirna Brekalo, TRT World, Ljubljana, Slovenija.
While life has been slowly returning to normal in Western Europe, where 80% of people are vaccinated, in the East, the EU's poorest member, Romania, is lagging behind. With just a third of people vaccinated, ICU beds are full, bodies are piling up, and the state is imploding. Health authorities blame a culture of fake news. But the crisis has revealed a huge distrust in the state. Critics blame corruption and political instability. Here is why.
Pentru că am avut familii care și-au înmormântat și 4 persoane din aceeași familie și vă dați seama într-un decurs de 2 săptămâni, ceea ce nu e atât de ușor.
Toate cazurile COVID?
Exact.
October was the deadliest month of the COVID-19 pandemic in Romania so far. The coronavirus killed someone every 5 minutes. The virus-related death toll has seen a sharp rise, hitting new daily records.
Cu ce aș putea eu să compar? Cu un om de zăpadă față de un iceberg. Icebergul fiind evident valul 4. Este enorm, este uriaș ce se întâmplă. Este peste cuvinte sau peste vocabularul cu care pot exprima eu mărimea și gravitatea ceea ce este acum.
Politicians blame the high cases on the public for being too hesitant to get jabbed. Only 37% of eligible citizens are fully vaccinated.
O fac la presiunile fetei mele, care pentru asta o fac. Eu nu eram decis, vreau să nu mai gândesc, mă tem de, mă tem de reacții adverse care pot să apară în timp. Vaccinul nu este suficient testat.
People hold the government responsible for corruption, inadequate health services, and a lack of leadership. Romania has the second lowest vaccination rate in the EU, just ahead of Bulgaria, and the government has sold unused vaccines to Denmark, Vietnam, and Ireland. By the end of October, all intensive care beds were full. Some patients had to be transferred to Poland and Hungary. Others were airlifted out by Germany's Air Force last week. Romania's healthcare system already had serious problems. It has the lowest healthcare fund among EU countries, and only one public hospital has been built since the end of communism. In the past year, fires in 3 hospitals killed 31 people. In 2015, a fire at a nightclub led to 64 deaths. 27 people lost their lives due to the fire. The rest were killed by hospital infections. At the same time, Romania has the highest rate of healthcare bribery among the EU. Across the border, Bulgaria faces a similar lethal mix of bribery, a weak healthcare system, and vaccine skepticism. Less than a third of people have been jabbed, and the unvaccinated account for 94% of deaths. all while the country prepares for its third election in 7 months. Conspiracy theories and mistrust are at their highest.
България се провали с ваксините. Не е страшно да си се провалило, по-страшно е да не си го признаеш. Мисля, че днес точно това се случва. По-добрият вариант е да си признаем една грешка и да се опитаме да я поправим. Посланието ми е много просто към всички уния хора, които още се колебаят. Дано да не разбират по трудния начин, че няма конспирация.
Politicians have avoided taking a stance on such topics to try to secure more votes. And that only makes a divided society more fragile.
Let me bring in Dr. Octavian Jurma. He was an advisor to the Romanian Health Ministry. Doctor, good to have you with us. What went wrong? Why is Romania struggling to tackle the COVID crisis so much?
There are several factors. Foremost, the political interference into the mitigation effort. Romania had done very, very well in the first wave when the mitigation was controlled strictly by medical doctors and public health experts. But in the fourth wave, this completely changed towards the political control and the political decision of what measures can be taken and what measures cannot. Also, the vaccination effort started very well in Romania, but again, once the politicians started to communicate and tell people what to do and not to do, and especially when they took complete relaxation measure in the summer while all the other Europe was vaccinating, we were the most relaxed country in Europe, and at one point the most relaxed country in the world, according to the Economist Index of return to normalcy.
Doctor, why are Romanians refusing to get vaccinated? What's the reason for this massive distrust in the officials, in the health authorities, and in the government itself?
Unfortunately, it comes back from the communist times where people didn't trust the government at all, and they're more likely that the truth will be coming from underground sources and whispers and rumors. So people were trained basically during communism to believe more in the rumors than in the official rhetoric, and this didn't change in the past 30 years. The new political class did not win the trust of the people. So because most of the communication on the vaccination front is done by politicians, people just don't trust it enough to vaccinate, and they trust more the rumors that are spread by the anti-vaccinist movement, which was also unmitigated. So we had a situation here where known anti-vaccinists are in the parliament. They, at one point, one of these ladies blocked a vaccination center in a quarantine zone without any legal consequences whatsoever, and they come to national TV and they try to portray their opinion as equal to medical doctors or health experts. So it's a very biased situation where the rumors are not mitigated.
Right, and Romania not having a government since last month is not helping either. So how can this be changed? How can Romania make people trust the government and stop looking into fake news, internet and anti-vaxxers campaigns that have been proved deadly?
Well, we do have an example in Europe, which is an excellent example. All that we need to do is to have the politician make 2 steps back and let some people that the population can trust, like it happened in Portugal. Our vaccination campaign is also led by a military doctor who is a very good professional, communicates very well. He is trusted, but he's not led to lead the vaccination campaign properly. So it's always censored and contradicted by the politicians. So if if the campaign would be trusted to some non-political public figures like this colonel who is also a medical doctor, like it happened in Portugal, and they will say, okay, the politicians have lied to you all this time. Just these are the 30 professionals that we can trust, and they will come door to door, and I'll be there and I'll talk to you. So trust me, don't trust them, and they will vaccinate the country. So it's not so complicated. Vaccination is not such a complicated issue, but it was complicated by a lot of misinformation and a lot of lack of trust. So this trust issue cannot be solved by the government. As you said, we have a huge crisis, and it doesn't have an end in sight for another couple of weeks. And we have the highest death per capita in the world right now, a daily death. So it's a huge crisis that people are afraid to go to the hospitals, that they are afraid to talk to the doctors when they get sick. They wait until the last minute when they can not breathe anymore. So this problem cannot be solved by the government. They have to pass it on to a selected group of professionals and let it do their job.
Right, Doctor, thanks so much for being with us. We'll keep an eye on that crisis in Romania and follow up that story definitely here on Across the Balkans. Thank you. Thanks for watching this episode of Across the Balkans. See you next time. Bye-bye for now.